In the late 1400s, the shogun of Japan broke his favorite tea bowl. It was delicate porcelain glazed in such a light blue that it could have been mistaken for the green of the sea. It had been in his family for centuries, a treasure brought over from China 200 years before he was born. The royal historian does not note if he dropped it himself or if a servant's momentary lapse in attention is what caused the break. It doesn't really make a difference. Everyone in the shogunate court understood immediately that this priceless piece would need to be repaired. But it would not be that simple. This unique style of porcelain was no longer produced in Japan. It was a secret that had been lost for more than 100 years. Undeterred, the shogun dispatched his most trusted servants to bring the broken shards of his bowl across the sea to China, where it could be mended. And over the course of many months, and with significant effort, an artisan of sufficient skill was located, employed, and eventually the priceless bowl was returned to the court of the shogun. He was delighted to have reacquired his family heirloom after its long journey. He opened up the lacquered black box that held it, and he was stunned. The bowl had indeed been repaired, but the repair work was ugly and brutal and raw. Rough metal staples, clamps that were almost insect, locust-like in appearance, had been attached to the bowl. Their grasp held it all together, but the hard, unfinished iron stood in harsh contrast to the elegant simplicity of the delicate porcelain. And historians diverge here in their opinion. Some claim the shogun loved the bowl even more now. It inspired him with its Zen message of the beauty one finds in brokenness. And others claim the opposite, that he was overcome with seething rage and heads literally rolled. Ultimately, the broken bowl led the craftsmen of his court to rethink and explore how Japanese artists repaired ceramics, and the art form known as kintsugi was born. Kintsugi, or golden joining, is the act of fixing broken porcelain with gold. Rather than rejoin ceramic pieces with camouflaged adhesive, the kintsugi technique employs a special sap dusted with gold or silver or platinum. Once completed, beautiful seams of gold glint in the conspicuous cracks of ceramic wares. In kintsugi, the cracks and seams that were once the cause of distress, because that is where the ceramic failed, are mended. And not only mended, but they have also become the most unique, the most beautiful, and even the strongest parts of the vessel. The ceramic may be beautiful, but it is the unhidden fracture which is shining gold. Early in my career as a rabbi, I met a young woman who had found her way to my synagogue. She had graduated from a nearby university, and instead of moving back to the coast, she decided to stay local. She was in her early 20s, charming, very social, but holding everyone at arm's length. She had a sadness that spilled out into all of her interactions. It seemed different, at odds with what should have been her natural spirit. And eventually she grew close enough with me that we got to share her story. She told me the year she graduated from university, she got lost. She kept saying, "I wasted a year of my life." Everyone around her knew what was going to come next, what they wanted to do, but not her. Maybe it was because all of her closest friends, including her on-again, off-again boyfriend, were a few years behind her in school. Maybe it's because she just hadn't found her passion yet. And so she stuck around her university town, working odd jobs, distracting her friends, breaking up and making up with the ex, and of course, partying like she was still a student. But even though she was pretending to be happy, even though she was acting like everything was normal, she was miserable. And one night it caught up with her. Out at a bar, she had too much to drink and opened herself up to the wrong person. All of her pain came spilling out. She told this friend of a friend how angry she was with the people she was closest to, how her roommate was judging her, that her ex just wanted her to leave so that he could move on. She talked about her brokenness, her fears about the people who were constantly letting her down, how she felt like she was lost in fog. She swung between fury and arrogance and despair. And at the end of the evening, the person that she had trusted all of these volatile truths with turned and repeated them, word for word, and shared them with all of the people that she had been talking about, all those people that she was close to. And so within days, her roommate told her she had to find a new place to live, and her ex was really her ex, and her friends who had been caught in the crossfire of her inner pain wanted nothing to do with her. Ironically, this was the kick that she needed. Now that she couldn't stay in her comfort zone, now that she had to leave, she had to get involved in that dreaded process of figuring it out. She moved to the city. She launched her life. She found a job. She started going to synagogue. She met other young Jews. She rented a small apartment. She got a cat. But she couldn't shake the feeling of failure. That feeling of failure was the sadness that I and others could sense when we interacted with her. It was like a weight dragging down her soul. And she felt it too, that it was a sickness of the spirit. And so during our conversation, she asked me, was there any way to make that feeling go away? Could the synagogue help her? Would God help her? I told her the truth, that I did believe God would help her, but first she needed to help herself, that she had to work towards forgiveness. Her feeling of failure would not go away until she had apologized to the people she had hurt, and she needed to realize that she was one of the people she had hurt too. She needed to forgive herself for not living up to her own expectations. Months later, I saw her again and she was lighter. Her smile reached her eyes. She told me she worked up the courage, she called those friends, she offered that sincere apology, and she had swallowed her pride and told them the truth. That yes, she had been soul deep hurt, she had been spiraling out of control, she was just lashing out. Her anger had never been with any of them, it had only ever been anger at herself. And to her surprise, though maybe not to yours, they had forgiven her. They had in fact hoped that one day she would call. And no, things were not exactly the way they were before, but the people who had been so important in her life, people that she thought she had lost forever, they were still there. The external forgiveness that she got was the start of the healing she needed inside. To stop blaming herself for not having all the answers figured out at 22 years old. To stop feeling like a failure just because she had been broken in her heart. Now that she had forgiveness, she started to flourish. She wasn't facing the end of the world. She found her way through it. She was patching things up. The gold she used to mend her broken heart was repentance and forgiveness. And just like the shogun's tea bowl, once it was mended, she was stronger and more beautiful than she had ever been before. Failure is a scary thing. Brokenness is frightening. Getting it wrong can be paralyzing. Today especially, In the court of public opinion, it seems that a mistake about something is a mistake about everything. And I see this especially in our teens and our young people who've spent their formative years in this terminally online climate of anonymous attack. And the lesson that so many of them seem to be hearing, reinforced by public figures and celebrities and politicians from Israel and Canada, and of course the United States, is that if you make a mistake, apologizing is the very last thing you should ever do. Because apologizing means forfeiting ground. It means sacrificing the narrative. It means coming to a halfway point, and we are deeply suspicious that anyone will meet us halfway. Admitting that we are wrong is not just a single act or a single statement, a single decision. Being wrong seems to mean now that we are opening ourselves up to the accusation that everything we have ever accomplished is tainted. In an increasingly bifurcated, it's you or me world, the stakes are very high. Because if you have it wrong, your opponents, your rivals, your enemies, that means that they are right. From this extreme perspective, in this world of instantaneous judgment, encamped opinions, many people are learning that forgiveness is not something that comes hand in hand with hard work, not something that comes through repentance, where if you make a mistake, you need to repair it, learn from it, grow from it. Because when people do reparative work today, sometimes they are met with suspicion and blame. You're only doing this because you were caught. Or good allies don't make that kind of a mistake. Or if you really loved X, you never would have done that. Your apology is performative. In a polarized climate, it seems that forgiveness only comes from having been proven right all along. One more reason to stand your ground, to admit to refuse any wrongdoing, refuse all culpability, refuse any room for growth, deny any empathy. It is better to be boldly unapologetic than shame yourself by being wrong. But Judaism has never seen the world this way. And in fact, Judaism cannot see the world this way. Because as Jews, we believe in a moral universe. Judaism believes in a great accounting that goes beyond the sense of being completely right or helplessly wrong. It includes the feelings and the good name and the well-being of those around you. As we said earlier today, for sins against God, Yom Kippur atones. But for sins against human beings, Yom Kippur does not atone, not until you have made peace with each other. In a moral universe where accountability is owed both to your fellow human beings and to God, we should never be ashamed at putting in the hard work to fix what we have broken. In her new book on repentance and repair, Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg makes a convincing case that one of the great problems facing the world today is an ideology that has embraced forgiveness and unity without the hard work of repair and repentance. People request and expect forgiveness without the hard work that goes into it. And that's what brings forward those not apologetic apologies, those "I'm sorry you were so offended." And unity, this desire to just move on, to make things the way they were before for everyone, without finishing the healing. Without finishing the healing, because to acknowledge healing is to acknowledge that we are uncomfortable and that there are fractures between us. That is what widens the cracks in society. Because calls for unity all too often include a frustration with, a silencing, an exploitation of the vulnerable who won't just get over the bad things that happen to them. She writes, "People hurt one another. Sometimes the harm is unintentional, even born of goodwill, the desire to help. Sometimes it's the result of ignorance, lack of information. Sometimes it's because of cowardice. Sometimes it reflects a self-protective impulse, a desire to preserve one's own self-image or concern about organizational public relations. Sometimes a long process of dehumanization makes atrocity possible. But whatever the cause, people manage to inflict damage in a myriad of ways, from hurt feelings to lost livelihoods, the infliction of trauma, the perpetuation of hate against vulnerable people, even the loss of life. And sometimes harm can be repaired and sometimes it can't. But regardless, in a moral universe, there is work to be done when harm is inflicted." Jews have been thinking about our communal mistakes and our individual failures, the work we need to repair them on this day for the better part of 3,000 years. In the temple, as it is described in our Torah, Yom Kippur was the day when the Kohen Gadol, the high priest, would go and purge himself of sin with a grand sacrifice. And so purified, he would go and make an apology to God, a soul confession in the Holy of Holies. And this repentance was for him, for his family, and the entire Israelite people. When the temple was destroyed by the Romans, we lost the ability for one person to make up for our entire nation. It became the individual responsibility of every person to look inwards, to engage in cheshbon hanefesh, the accounting of the soul, and to perform acts of tshuva, of returning to try and make things right. The Torah, the Mishnah, the Talmud, all of them go into incredible detail about the high priest's confession. What will it take to make him pure? What is it he needs to say? And of course, they spill pages of ink into what can go wrong. What if you don't do the sacrifice right? What if he's an idiot and forgets the words? What if he becomes spiritually unclean between the altar and the Holy of Holies? What if, God forbid, he just dies in there? But one question they never ask is, what if this year, what if maybe neither he or anyone else did anything wrong? Our rabbis believed in miracles. They planned for every possibility, permutation, eventuality, dreamed of scenarios, and the most unlikely of hypotheses. But they were not fools. Why would you ever ask a question that would never seriously need to be asked? I saw a lot of myself in the lost young woman who came to see me. Hearing her story brought me back to one friend I had hurt, who rightfully cut all ties with me, and I never expected to see them again. But one day, thousands of miles away in one of the biggest cities in North America, I ran into them on the street. A literal 1 in a million chance meeting. It was awkward. It was painful. It was unexpected. All of these warm feelings that I had in my heart for this person, all of the good memories and the deep affection from years of being close, rose up to the surface, and they were fighting with this frozen shell of anger and shame that I felt at seeing them. And they saw me too. And at a glance, I could see that they were also trying to decide, what should they do? Should they just spin around and walk the other way? Should they walk by and ignore me? Should they say hi and pretend that nothing had happened and just endure a polite 15 seconds until we could just get away from each other? Our eyes met, and my heart broke. It shattered. And all of my defenses fell down, all of my reasons why I wasn't really to blame, all of my long rehearsed, if I ever see that person again, this is exactly what I'm going to tell them, retreated. And instead, I was so full of emotion I could barely breathe. I croaked out, "I'm sorry." And their entire body language changed. "I'm sorry." I continued, "I'm sorry. It was me. I was wrong. I shouldn't have hurt you. I don't give myself credit for this. I don't tell this story to make myself look good. I was at fault entirely for what had happened between us. I share this memory because that apology was one of the most spiritual moments of my life. Looking back now, more than a decade later, I realize that what I felt in that moment was one of the things that I understand as God. God imminently present in my life, letting my heart break clean so that it could be repaired with gold. From that day on, I was dear friends again with that person for many years, until one day we weren't. And this time, unlike the first time, it wasn't either of our faults. Neither of us set out to hurt the other one. There was no big falling away. There wasn't even a conversation about it. We just moved on to be completely different people with completely different lives. And this time there wasn't anything left to fix. Not every act of repair, of tikkun, is forever. But that doesn't mean that we don't go around mending our cracks. In the years since this has happened, I have made plentiful mistakes. I have sought plenty of forgiveness. And when I've made amends with others, I've never felt God the same way that I felt God that day, that 1 in a million chance day. But that's how it works sometimes. The prophet Isaiah states, "Anachnu hachomer, va'ata yotzreinu, u'ma'aseh yadecha chulanu." We are the clay, you are the potter, we are the work of your hands. And sometimes the potter is working on us directly, gently shaping us, molding us, taking off all those rough edges. And some days the potter trusts the clay to hold its own shape. In the laws of kashrut, inspired by our ancient rabbis, understood by our sage Maimonides, everyone understands that different substances and materials, from metal to glass, china, plastic, all of them are made kosher, spiritually repaired in a way that suits the material. And the way the rabbis understand it, when vessels or tools or utensils interact with something that isn't kosher, they pick up the ta'am, the flavor of that thing. And it's not enough to just wipe it off. You need a ritual. You need a ritual to erase the flavor. Objects made from metal are usually heated up until they're super hot. Objects made from glass are submerged into boiling water. But none of those rituals work on clay. None of those rituals work on clay. According to the rabbis, clay is porous, and the things that clay permanently absorbs come in from the world outside it. You can put it in a great fire, but it won't burn it away. You can submerge it in hot water, but it won't wash it clean. There's only one way to repair a clay vessel, to make it kosher. And to do that, you have to break it. Once it's broken, the clay vessel is instantly thought of as an entirely new thing. It's no longer what it was at all, and in that moment when the clay stops being what it was and it just becomes shards, something amazing happens. The shards become pure again. And when you reassemble those shards, when you join them back together, whatever you make is pure too. An unbroken earthen vessel is never clean again. It needs to crack. It needs to become both the same as it was and also entirely new. And you need to be able to see the break the rest of the time you use it. Vayotzer Adonai Elohim et ha'adam afar min ha'adama. And God formed human beings from the earth, from the dust, from the clay of the ground, shaping us like a potter. Vayipach ba'afav nishmat chayim, and God blew from his nostrils the breath of life, like fire in a kiln, forging us with heavenly breath. Vayehi adam lenefesh chaya, and human beings became living souls. The only way to repair clay, to make it whole, is to break it. And we human beings, we are clay. This is Yom Kippur. It is not a day about being perfect. It's not even a day about being right. It's a day about being broken and remade. It's a day about repairing our flaws and filling them in with gold. This is Yom Hadin, our day of judgment. We are not whole, and we should not be, because we are shattered and we are cracked. But you know, there was a wise sage in Montreal, and he said, there is a crack in everything. That is how the light gets in. Gemar Chatima Tova. May we all be sealed for good.